Okay, we're live.
Hi, Nat. How are you?
Good, Rob. How are you?
Good. Not too bad, thank you. So I think
Um,
this is episode. I think so.
I think it's episode 5, 6. We've just been. I think we've lost count. 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4, 5. So we're up to episode 6. Woohoo!
Cool.
We are only going to have a short one tonight because it's only the
Yeah.
two of us.
Yeah.
So of course, before any show, you and I have a catch up, have a chat, blah blah blah. One thing that we both agreed on that we're going to talk about tonight's topic next, but we just want to say this that we've said basically in every show that men's issues and men's rights and MRAs and whatever label you want to put on to this side of the fence, we support all genders. We support all races, all sexes, all sexual orientations. There's no limit to what we want to support. There might be personal views where, and I'll be upfront about it. This non-binary stuff, I've read up about it. I've watched clips on it. Everything. I still just believe there's two genders. That's my personal choice. But it's not to say I'm not going to address you in the pronoun that you want to be identified with. I'll respect that, whether I agree with it or not.
And it's not about imposing our will on others. This is the key. And to me, it's very much about fairness, about being fair to all members of society. Identity politics uses the language of inclusion, but it is very much exclusionary, unfortunately. So we see, for example, with identity politics, people being told what they can and can't do based on their ethnicity, wearing certain clothes, even preparing certain foods. We haven't quite got to the point of them trying to stop people from eating certain foods based on their ethnicity, but I think we'll get there before long, within a few years. Do that. Yeah. So I mean that'll have an impact on restaurants and so forth. But anyway, that's very exclusionary, identity politics, and that's what we reject. Yes. So tonight's topic, Nick is just asking what the topic is. The topic tonight is consent, a topic close to my heart.
Which is, I'm glad that, and before the show, I actually touched base with this. I hate the term because I think it's being forced onto us, and not even by the. It's being forced onto us by some movement of the term cisgender, but I'll use or super straight. I'll touch base on that and say I'm glad that we are both of the opposite sex to have this conversation, and we're both cisgender. It really does irritate me. But I do think it's going to be, it's a hot topic right now. And as you said, it is close to home, and it's being close to home for us both, because as a female who, has, how can I say this without me sounding like the term greyhound, has had my fair share of sexual partners, let's just say. But you can start off, because I would really love to hear your side of the discussion.
All right, no problem. So basically, a lot of people are still sort of behind the times in what's been going on with consent. A lot of people, even people who are sort of paying attention or call themselves feminists or paying attention to what feminism is doing, they're not really keeping an eye on it. Now, it used to be the case that the campaigns were run here in Australia. Which part no means no, which part of no don't you understand was a very common saying. We'd actually had commercials on TV with that saying, and I think that most people in society would would agree that today a clear no is a stop sign, and that should be the end of that. But and it's something I want to make one historical point, but I think I'll probably put that to the side for now. But we've moved beyond that now. What we're now looking at is not no means no, but rather yes means yes. And this is something called affirmative consent. There's actually another category called enthusiastic consent, which is even worse. But affirmative consent basically says that that a sexual partner, and the reality is this is something that's only put on men. So the men have to understand that the woman is continuously affirming consent during sex. Now, there's a few problems with this. If the woman is supposed to be able, the man's supposed to be able to pick up non-verbal signals, but of course, down the track, what happens if he misunderstood those non-verbal signals? She makes an accusation of sexual assault, and he's then left in court having to basically argue. The onus is on him to then argue that he actually had consent. So it shifts the burden of proof. Now, we've also got, as I said, enthusiastic consent, which is in that the woman has to consent enthusiastically, just be very, very keen. Okay. Now, this is all meant to be non-verbal. Now, the problem, of course, is that consent can be withdrawn at any time. This is a really key point. Consent can be withdrawn at any time. So let's just say that a woman's being verbal and she says, she gives consent. Yes, I want to continue. Okay. She could withdraw consent in her own mind immediately afterwards, because remember, consent can be withdrawn at any time. The man is now committing sexual assault and he doesn't even know it. And if she goes away and makes a complaint in court, and goes to court, he's then the onus of proof is then on him to, as I said, to establish that consent was still there, even though she had withdrawn. She could go to court and swear in the box that she was that she had consented, that she had withdrawn consent, and that's what could be quite legitimate because she had in her own mind and she'd never told him. So shifting away from the requirement to tell someone no to expecting them to understand this consent, this affirmative consent, is really a very, very dangerous precedent. And I just want to also point out that all of the discussion, all of it up to this point, has been about men accepting reading women's consent. There's been no discussion at all the other way.
No. And this is something I actually I wanted to bring up is the drunken one, where if she's drunk and you go home, you have sex, it is sexual assault or rape because she's drunk. But what if the tables are turned? What if I'm driving, I go out on a blind date, I pick him up, I go out drive. Because I'm driving, I don't drink. He has a few, come back to my place, have sex. Haven't I technically sexually assaulted him or raped him?
The state has shown no interest in pursuing that at all. They very much consider it gendered. In fact, one of the jokes in our groups, you wouldn't have been there that day, Natalie, but one day we had a barbecue in Brisbane. Natalie, of course, is in Melbourne. So one day we had a barbecue in Brisbane, and one of our female members took a drink of alcohol. And of course, the joke was that she'd immediately lost any ability to sort of, any sort of consent or any agency at all. Because apparently, as far as the state is concerned, as soon as a woman consumes alcohol, she loses all agency. But men, not so much.
But that's automatically making me the victim. If I have an alcoholic drink, I'm the victim right there and then. Trust me, I've said yes whilst I've been drunk, and I've said no whilst I've been drunk. I mean, I really don't drink that much, but
The problem is, because of the situation as it is now, and the willingness of the state to just assume that a woman has lost control, because there's no reliable way of testing how there's no, as far as I know, any legal definition for being drunk. or any reliable way. You can test alcohol in blood alcohol, but different people respond differently. So you can't reliably say how a person was responding. And it seems that the state has been too willing to accept that women lose control when consuming a small amount of alcohol, which means men have to be very, very careful how they interact with women who have had any alcohol at all. And they certainly shouldn't go to bed with them because it's too dangerous now. That's the point we've reached.
But again, it's putting females automatically as a victim, and where I'm not a victim, you know, right this minute, I'm not a victim. I mean, I'm in a lot of pain, but I'm definitely not a victim.
We often joke that feminists have a very poor opinion of women because they're always trying to set up systems to protect them from the world rather than treating them as adults.
There are some parts that I agree with, like no means no. So
yes.
if I'm turning around and saying we all agree with that, no means no.
That's a mainstream Western view at this point.
Right.
Yep.
Everybody agrees with that. If during the act I start feeling uncomfortable or it's going in a direction that I don't want it to go in, no means no. And trust me, I'm a big enough of a bitch that when I say no, they know it's no. And it stops right there. I think nowadays we're all. I'll restate this one. Okay, so for our generation, so I'm 50. Yeah, I know I don't look it. So from, let's say 35, where a good maturity has hit a lot of women, like you still think you're 16, but you've got that, you finally got that adult brain. So 35 up, right in this day and age, you're strong, you're independent, you've worked, most of the time you've had kids, you're pretty grown up by this stage. What I am finding, though, is 35 down is a lot of women who go on Tinder dates, for example, left and right, and they'll go on a different date every single night just to get the free meal.
Wow.
Or
sounds like a lot of work for a free meal to me, but anyway, go on.
Or they'll send nudie shots. They'll play the sexual being game and then get shocked when they get the famous dick pic. And all these sort of things. I think 35 down in today's day and age are a lot more sexually explicit than what we were, or what this 35 up age group were.
Do you think that's a function of the age, or rather of the time? Do you think that it's changing in terms of?
Well, funnily enough, I think it's a lot to do with the times. And I had this conversation with a friend today that I can remember, and I'll blame myself as a parent and a lot of people, a lot of my generation or our generation, where kids have no respect now. I had lunch I had today off, and I had lunch in this beautiful pub in Berwick, and it was old and it had these beautiful old tables and these fantastic photos up on the wall. And we were sitting inside, we were looking outside at the beer garden, and all I could picture was this on a Friday or Saturday night with a bunch of 18 to 25-year-olds getting drunk and not appreciating the beauty of this old pub. And I thought back and I thought the clubs and the nightclubs I went to were modern, but if I went into a place that was old or was an RSL or something like that, I appreciated the history of it, where I just don't think it's appreciated now. So I do think it's not an age thing. So it wasn't like when we were 18. I think it is a generational thing where sex is explicit. So when these, God, I sound like my mother, when these kids that are, and we could be talking into their late 20s, are being so sexually explicit, and they go out and they have these one-night stands, and they say yes. But how is anybody? I wouldn't know how to read the body language.
It's almost, I think it's impractical to expect people to read another person's body language and know reliably what it is that they're saying. I mean, yes, we do. Humans do communicate non-verbally a lot, but when so much is hanging on it, I think it's ridiculous. And I think that there would really need to be verbal communication. And as I said, I'll remind everybody, consent can be withdrawn at any time. So bear that in mind.
I think it's got to be the word no.
That's
I don't think it's got to be the word yes. It's got to be the word no.
Exactly. That's right.
Because I could be making out with a guy, and I'm going to use myself always in this scenario, so I'm not targeting anyone. I'll target myself. If I'm making out with a guy and he starts taking my clothes off, that's when I have the choice to say no.
That's right. Exactly. And
he doesn't have to hear the word yes, he has to hear the word no.
Yep. And if there really are young women who are having trouble saying that, then that's the problem, and then that needs to be addressed.
Right. But it's not the men that we have to educate. Then it's these women that we have to educate to teach them to stand up and go no.
See, feminists will be. Any feminist watching will now be screaming victim blaming. So, there is that.
But I'm not victim blaming. I'm teaching these women to be strong, independent women, which the feminists want.
Yep. Supposedly.
I am lucky enough that I'm a strong, independent female. I live by myself. My son comes home once a week, once a fortnight, for a couple of days, then goes back to work. He works down at the island. My sister is an amazing, strong, independent woman. She's actually one of my heroes. She has saved me from myself, from self-destructing. My mum, strong, independent woman. My grandmother, strong, independent woman. So I come from this long line of strong, independent women. And I'm a strong, independent woman. If it happened because of the perception of what feminism was, great. Powerful to you. But I'm not going to call myself a feminist in today's day and day.
And I'd also encourage people to look. I mean, I'm trying to finish a book on this exact subject. There's a part of the reason I always find new material to add, which is part of the thing that's been delaying me. But look at the historical record. Look at the lives that men and women led historically. I think people would be stunned at how much women worked, how often they ran businesses, how involved they were in politics, and so forth. It's just amazing. And feminism really just infantilizes women, and especially claims that until recently, women couldn't do anything at all. And they do this because if they didn't, feminism paints itself as having rescued women, but there has to have been something to rescue them from. So they claim that women were oppressed, and then they were recently freed. But history is rather a lot more complicated than
So, yeah, and well, this is going to be a future topic of suffragettes and the bra burners. So I don't want to touch too much on it tonight, but I have done a lot of research on it because I've sent you a million clips. But my understanding is there was about a 10-year gap, and I think it was between 1918 and 1928.
That was in the UK.
Yeah, in the UK, where women didn't have the same equal opportunity to vote, and it was only because of the end of World War I.
Yeah. In fact, women over 30. So, to give everyone a quick rundown, so basically, over voting rights until the 19th century were pretty much tied to property. We know the UK is the country with the best records. We know that women who were property owners could vote. They've got 16th, 17th century records showing that. It is true, most property owners were men, but there were a minority of property owners who were women. Over the 19th century, the UK gradually added more and more men to the franchise, but they didn't actually grant the vote to all men until 1918. And this actually means that a lot of the men that the UK drafted and sent off to World War I couldn't vote for the government that sent them. Now, at the same time, they granted the vote to women over 30, and then 10 years later, they brought it down to the same age, which was 21. And it's generally believed that this was because of the large number of men who'd been killed in World War I, that the women would have constituted a majority of the electorate if they'd granted them the vote on the same basis in 1918. So yeah, there was a 10-year period, and as a general rule, if a country got its independence in the 20th or 21st centuries, men and women got the vote at the same time. If it got its independence in the 19th century, then there's usually a few years or sometimes a few decades between universal male suffrage and universal female suffrage. That's as a general rule. So there's a few exceptions, like one or two countries where it was over 100 years, but they're outliers. Most countries, Australian colonies, were between 7 and 51 years.
Yeah, but I think women got the vote in Australia in 1901 from.
So Australia, of course, was federated in 1901. What they did was at the first election, they said if you could vote in your home state, because they didn't have a chance to produce any federal laws, they said if you could vote in your home state, you could vote at the federal election. And what that meant was that in two states, now I'm trying to think, it was in two states that women could vote. So and then women got the federal vote in 1902. But there were a couple of states where they were already entitled to vote, and so could vote in the first election.
So it wasn't a lot, and the American suffrages was just completely different. It was more racist than people ever realize.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know we're getting off the topic now, but yeah, a lot of people don't know that certainly the feminist movement was actually tied up with the KKK at one point, actually, in the US. Not all feminists. There was a minority who objected to this, but the majority of feminists in the 1920s, for example, were very closely aligned with the KKK. And the feminists who rejected that, their branch of feminism basically died off. But that would be a great topic for a future.
Yeah, we will. We are going to touch base on this in a future thing. The one thing I did want to touch base on, is going back to consent, was I believe it's in Canada. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong because you're the one writing the book. Is there's actually now a contract that a female can sign to say, yes, I've agreed to sleep with John Smith.
So, well, my book's on history, but those contracts, they're basically witness signatures, basically see people saying, yes, I consented. The problem is, and some people even on our side have argued I'm a bit harsh on this, but I say they're not worth the paper they're written on. And the reason is because consent can be withdrawn at any time. So the woman may well have signed that document and meant it at the time, and 1 minute later or 30 seconds later or 5 seconds later changed her mind, withdrawn consent. And she'll go to court and they can ask her and she'll say, yep, absolutely signed that and agreed with it, and then I changed my mind. And that's perfectly legitimate, and therefore the paper's not worth anything. The key, though, is she has to, at the moment, make it that clear. But if we shift into an affirmative consent, then she will no longer have to notify the man of a change of status, of a withdrawal of consent.
Because it is going back to that one thing that I said before, is that we have to teach our girls and our women to say no. If they're uncomfortable, say no. And it's not victim blaming. It's actually teaching women to have the strength within them to say, no, I feel uncomfortable, stop. Whether it's before or during, if it goes in a different direction, stop.
And there is such a thing as assertiveness training. Speaking of which, and we're going off the topic a little bit again, but the so-called wage gap, which is really an earnings gap, there is a difference between average earnings for men and average earnings for women. It's largely a result of choice going right back to primary school. But one interesting thing they found was that at the same level, in jobs where people negotiate their own salary, like or salary positions, knowledge workers, that sort of thing, they did find a difference where women were generally negotiating salaries that were lower than men. But what was interesting was they found that it actually correlated with the psychological characteristic of assertiveness, not with gender. And when they gave assertiveness training to these people, the difference largely went away. So what's really happening there is, on average, women are not being as assertive when they're negotiating salaries as men are in, say, IT positions, senior IT positions and so forth, and they're coming out with lower salaries. So anyway, so we're getting back to, comes back to assertiveness training, and there's a lot to be said for that.
But I think that's what it is. Yes, I do think to a very small certain extent, you do have to read between the lines. So if she's timid, she's going, yeah, okay. Obviously, she's not okay. But that's a clear sign that you don't have to be a mind reader for that. That, Nick commented before, it's hard to be mind readers. But if she's timid and she's going, yeah, okay, let's do this, she's not. She's obviously uncomfortable and she's just going along with it. But it still is, as you said, it's that assertive training. If we can teach women to be more assertive rather than men to be less masculine, because I love masculine men. Give me a man with hair on his chest. Do not wear gold medallions. Just saying. But all these metrosexuals, it's like, if I wanted to be a lesbian, I would. Be a strong man.
One point I wanted to mention, you mentioned Canada earlier, and there was a particular point that just reminded me while you were saying those things before. One of the things the High Court in Canada has ruled, and a lot of Canadians don't know this, and it's actually quite a problem, is that they've ruled that any consent that was granted ceases at unconsciousness. Now, that on the surface, that may seem to be a good thing, and perhaps in some situations it is, but there's an interesting problem that's arisen, that some people actually wake their sexual partners with sexual activity, right? Now, it may be the case that a woman says, oh, yeah, I'm fine with that, no problem at all, and the man does. In Canada, he's sexually assaulting her, because even if she consented to being woken in that manner, as soon as she falls unconscious, the consent is voided as far as the Canadian courts are concerned. So if he proceeds to wake her up with sex, he's actually raped her. And the fact that she consented before she went to sleep is irrelevant. Now, how many cases of this go to court? Perhaps it's not not going to court often, but the fact that this is occurring is, I think, extremely concerning.
Okay, so we've actually done really good tonight. We've just hit 30 minutes. I think the moral of tonight's episode literally is: women, say no.
Yes.
No offense to men, they're not mind readers, but neither are we.
Yep. I had a couple of case studies I was going to mention.
Yeah.
We said we were going to do a few extra ones, didn't we? So there was a gentleman by the name of Kevin Ibbs. He's Australian, was Australian. He's passed away now. Kevin Ibbs was, I think I may have mentioned him previously, actually. Kevin, on the previous episode, Kevin Ibbs was accused of rape, and he had consensual sex with a woman, and after they'd been having sex for a while, she withdrew consent, and she claimed Kevin continued having sexual intercourse with her for 30 seconds. I believe he disputed that. But anyway, he did agree that they'd been having consensual sex before that. He was convicted of rape and spent 4 years in prison. Now, what ended up transpiring, though, is his ex-wife was in the house at the time, knew he was having sex with this woman. The woman and his ex-wife had actually conspired to get him out of the house. And they actually, so she started having sex with him, intending to withdraw consent suddenly, which she did, so to get him charged with rape and jailed and get him out of the house. Kevin lost everything. He estimated his losses at over $1 million Australian dollars. He was spent 4 years in jail. He was eventually exonerated, but only because the criminal conspiracy came out, not because of the 30 seconds. So let's be very clear about that. Okay. So he ended up taking his own life. He received $20,000 in compensation, and a few years later, he took his own life. His life had been destroyed by this criminal conspiracy. But the key is it all rested on 30 seconds. Now ponder that for a moment. 30 seconds, 4 years. Okay. Now there's another boy, Mahmoud Babi, I believe is how his name is pronounced, in the US. He was having consensual sexual intercourse with an adult woman. She withdrew consent. Now, in this case, it appears to have been a genuine withdrawal of consent. She changed her mind. She no longer wanted to have sex. Remember, he's underage, right? She claims he continued for 5 to 10 seconds. I believe he disputed that. He was also convicted of rape and went to jail. 5 to 10 seconds. Okay? So when I say consent can be withdrawn at any time, right, I mean it. These are cases that have happened under our current law where we're talking seconds, right? So if you're a man and you're with a woman and she withdraws consent, cease activity immediately. Because if you do not, you could go to jail. You might go to jail anyway, right? Imagine how this will be when we're in an affirmative consent jurisdiction.
With the American one, it reminds me of that scene on the Red Pill with the young boy who was, I'm going to say raped because it's not sexual assault, by his female teacher. She went to jail but had his kid and came out, and he, who was underage, had to pay child support.
Yes, that's right. That's very common.
The thing is, why wasn't this woman, who was an adult, why wasn't she charged with statutory rape?
Exactly, and in the case of Mahmoud Babi, the woman presumably should have been as well, because she was an adult woman having sex with a child who couldn't consent. Exactly, that's right. By the way, in the case of those of the child support for underage fathers, the state will normally not require them to pay until they're 18. And what happens is on their 18th birthday, they get hit with back claim to the birth of the child plus interest.
But so he was assaulted. He was raped by this. It wasn't even statutory rape. He was raped.
Yeah, there are also a lot of cases in the US that are documented of men who are provably not the fathers being compelled by the state to pay money. and being jailed if they
Yeah.
don't. Yeah.
Well, how's that? How does that work?
Yeah.
It,
So yeah, there are
it,
a lot of these cases. It's standard. Yeah.
I understand, especially in America with American sports, the way it is, the millions of dollars the American sports players are paid. So we're talking about football, basketball, baseball, and all that, where they're they're instructed that if you're going to hook up with somebody, to definitely use a condom and get rid of it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you rely on her to do it, and this just makes me she will go and inseminate herself with the stuff that's left behind in the condom, get pregnant, and then hit you up for child support.
Yep. Men, as a general rule, certainly throughout the West, and really, and this is generally true everywhere these days, men are assumed to have surrendered any control of semen once it leaves their body. And in one US court, it was ruled to be a gift. I thought that was a cute wording. He gave her a gift. Now, I believe in that one, it was into a condom, and she then self-impregnated with the semen left in the condom. And the courts ruled he'd given her a gift. It's crazy.
But that's it. It's like he hasn't given.
No,
he hasn't given consent.
For men, consent to sex is consent to parenthood. For women, it isn't. That's virtually universally true now. For men, consent to sex is consent to parenthood. Remember that, men, when you're having sex, because you are consenting to potential parenthood. Think about that. By the way, on the topic of that, there's been a bit of a turnaround in terms of younger kids, sort of under 18 at the moment, where they're actually having less sex than the 20-year-olds were at their age. And there seems to be a general turnaround where the current generation coming up, who aren't yet able to vote, seem to be a lot less, late teens, for example, are less inclined to engage in sex early in life. Now, the question is why. It could be that they're being more responsible. Could be that they're being more fearful. So yeah, there's a few reasons, but I suspect them.
Video games.
Yeah, yes, that's actually been raised as a possibility as well. Exactly, that's right. Especially among the boys.
I think I do truly believe it's video games. I mean, I'm going back to when I was. Oh, thank God, on this part. Thank God my mother's not here to hear this. May she rest in peace and all that. I was nightclubbing at the age of 14. I was tall.
Yeah.
And I've always been tall. Like, you know how tall I am. I know. I was nightclubbing at 19. I won't say what age I lost my virginity, but let's just say, it was before 20. I find it very. We had 4 TV channels. We had the cinemas. We did have video stores. That was great new entertainment. And we had, maybe Nintendo, and you had like 3 or 4 games. And back in that day and age, and I'm sounding old, is
they weren't very good.
No, they were like $30, and it would take you one day to get to the end.
Okay.
And $30 back then was like you could go out on a date with $30.
Yep.
God, I sound old. But I think because we were outside a lot more of the time, it was that old saying of, we didn't need a phone, we didn't need a watch. It's like you came inside when the street lights came on. And I think because we had that, Gen X were actually lucky that we got brought up in a time where there was black and white TV, and then there was color TV, and then there was computers and video games, and then internet. So we've had the whole range of it, where we've been trained in it all. Where the generation before us might be able to use a computer, might be able to use the internet and everything and have all of it, but we've actually lived the whole thing. But when we were teenagers, we were like, I can remember bonfire night. Used to go down the beach and have bonfire night and let off firecrackers and all of that, and just all these going out, whether it was to a nightclub, but we had blue light discos and nightclubs, and we went out to dinner with our family, and it was at the local Pizza Hut and local Chinese restaurant, where I think kids now have got video games where they talk to people.
Incredibly immersive. That's right. That's right.
You've got Netflix, you've got Amazon Prime, you've got Disney, you've got all these different streaming channels. But I can't even remember when, in the 90s, when cable hit us, Foxtel and all that. And that was like, oh, wow. But after having it for a week, I'm like, oh, wow. It's the same stuff repeated over and over again. Where with these streaming channels, you watch what you want to watch when you want to watch it.
Yep.
And I think that's where nowadays, where they're not being more responsible, they're not being more this, there's just more to do at home than what there was when we were kids. I think
yes, that has been raised, the possibility, and I think there's probably there's a good argument for that, actually. And interestingly enough, more generally, a lot of countries are actually starting to show a declining birth rate. That's true even in the developing world, which is something that's all happened over about the last 10 years, and that's something that a lot of people weren't expecting. So technology may well be a significant factor in this. Feminists like to claim it's the education of women that's the cause of that. I've looked into it. I honestly can't see any research that actually says that. It's one of several things that occur at the same time. They like to claim that's the cause, of course, but I suspect it's more, if anything, education across the entire society.
I think just to tag onto this before we go, is I think there was the documentary, is it Inconvenient Truth, where he discusses the population growth in the last 100 years. And you see it from like 1950, where it's just like this, it's just like this. And then from like 1980, it just sort of shot up out of nowhere. And if it's coming back down, in the 1950s to the 1960s, we were still being responsible. Women weren't having the freedom of sex that we had in the freedom of love from the 70s and like the 80s of like, woohoo, I can have sex and nobody's, I'm not going to be called an SLUT. And then in the 90s, everybody was just doing it by then. I don't think it's an education thing, because we knew then, I mean, in the 80s, we had AIDS, where it was like, what was the old saying of like, whoever you're having sex with, you're having sex with everybody they've had sex with, everybody they've had sex with. So I don't think it was an educational thing. We had that in the 80s. We knew we could get pregnant. We knew we could get STDs, and there was now AIDS on the plate. I do think it has literally come down to technology, internet. I mean, we didn't have this. What we're doing now, we didn't have it.
With the education is what happens is when people urbanize, they stop working on the farm, they live in a city, they get jobs in the city, they commute, and they tend to have less kids. And part of the reason is because kids get more expensive too. So on the farm, kids are essentially a resource to help you farm. We've seen that back to thousands of years. But when you're in a city, kids are kind of actually a cost sink, as it were. And so you end up going from 7 to 2.
Yeah, so I've gone from, like, my son's now 22. He texted me yesterday morning, said he's coming home for a few days. And the first thing I thought is, I've only got food in the fridge for myself. Go and do some online shopping for him.
Yep.
Which I did. So that cost me more.
That's
and
right.
he's 22, but I'm still his mum, and I'll still make sure there's food in the cupboard for him.
Exactly. That's right. People are driven to be parents who want to be parents, but we end up people are urbanized. Generally, the parents of 1 or 2 kids rather than many.
Yeah. Okay, so we've hit the 45-minute mark. That's as far as we want to go.
Perfect time to stop.
Yeah. So, as usual, hit like and subscribe from down below if you're on YouTube. If you're on Facebook, just do whatever you have to do on Facebook. We're going to be doing this show. So the end of daylight savings is coming up, I believe, at Easter. So Rob and I will be talking about times then, whether it'll be 9 o'clock our time or 8 o'clock our time. Because right now we're an hour difference.
Exactly, because I'm in Queensland and we don't have daylight saving because the curtains would fade.
Yeah. The cows get confused.
That's right. I believe they actually do get confused.
They do that. That one's actually true.
Yeah, that's right.
We thought it was the same joke as the curtains fade, but then we found out that one's actually true.
That's right, yes. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. So we'll next week, we don't know what's happening, whether it's a special guest. Rob and I will talk about that during the week, or what the topic's going to be. But as you can see, we've got a huge range of topics coming up. From cancel culture, the history of feminism. We've got special guests of Paul Elam, who I'm proud to say is going to join us. I might just go a bit gaga for the first, I don't know, half an hour, so you guys will just have to chat. But I am really enjoying doing this. My sister posted up something really lovely and emotional, supporting what we're doing. So we're slowly getting out there, but we're getting out there. But you hit share our videos, get everybody talking about what's happening, because we're not doing this for us. We're doing it for you. Like every man, woman, child, non-gender, cisgender, transgender, whatever gender you want to be labeled at, we're doing it for you. Yep,
that's right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Night.